let's get started. It is 7:34 Mountain, so 9:34 Eastern. The reason for the call is we have proposed litigation against the state of Maine. Oliver Hall sent a summary to the LNC list. Mr. Hall, if you could just briefly go over what we need to authorize and how much it is anticipated to cost.
Sure, thank you. So the memo lays out the background. The Libertarian Party of Maine qualified for the ballot, but due to the operation of the statutory provisions that we're proposing to challenge, they've been disqualified from the ballot. As a result of that process, the 5,000 registered voters that they enrolled as members of the Libertarian Party of Maine have been unenrolled, and now they are officially designated as basically independent voters. And so the lawsuit would, and I should say the reason they are unenrolled is that, and the party is disqualified, is that having enrolled 5,000 members in order to qualify as a new party, they were required within 2 general elections to register a total of 10,000 members, and they were unable to do that. Really, probably the main reason, if not the only reason they were unable to do that, is that the signature requirements for a candidate to appear on the primary election ballot for the Libertarian Party are unconstitutionally burdensome. And I think I can say that, although that's a judgment of law, I think I can say that without reservation, because the requirement is 2,000 signatures for a statewide office, but the signatures have to come from registered members of the party. And when there are only about 5,000 members of the party and you're requiring candidates to get 2,000 signatures, you're imposing a signature requirement of something like 30% or more. And that is clearly unconstitutional under Supreme Court precedent. So the proposed lawsuit would challenge all of these provisions separately and in conjunction with one another. For example, the signature requirements, I think, are pretty clearly unconstitutional standing alone, but when you apply them in tandem with that 10,000 signatures.
C-H-R-I-S-O-I.
Hello?
Hello?
Go ahead and continue, Oliver. I think somebody called in at the time that you were talking.
Yeah. When you apply those signature requirements with the 10,000 member requirement for retaining ballot access, it makes the 10,000 member requirement much more constitutionally suspect, because how can a state reasonably require a party to effectively double its membership when the party is prevented from running candidates for office by these unconstitutionally burdensome primary election signature requirements? So I think the merits of this case are pretty strong, and for that reason, I think that it's something that the LNC should seriously consider supporting. That said, I always want to caution that I am not advocating that the LNC do one thing or another with respect to this lawsuit or any of these other proposed matters that come before the committee for consideration. It's really just my role to explain the basis for the proposed litigation and analyze the strengths and weaknesses of it to the best of my ability. So I think the memo itself really spells out all of this stuff, and without repeating that any more than I already have, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, this is Jim Lark. First of all, as always, thank you for your work on behalf of the Libertarian Party. In 2016, the Libertarian Party of Maine filed a lawsuit challenging provisions and won a preliminary injunction. would this, excuse my ignorance, would this be filed in front of the same people who provided the preliminary injunction?
Well, it would be filed in front of the same court.
Yes.
And very likely might be assigned to the same judge. Very often for considerations of judicial economy, the court will assign a judge who's familiar with a matter to preside over a case that seems to be closely related to one that he has previously ruled upon. And so that might well happen in this case. I'm not sure how many judges there are on the District of Maine, but the judge that presided over the previous case, Judge Woodcock, he did rule in our favor on that preliminary injunction matter. That was actually pretty unusual because what he had actually done was ruled against us on a procedural matter that he simply got wrong. And so we filed a motion for reconsideration, and he pretty much had to correct the error, the clear error that he made. And that's how he ended up ruling in our favor. And then that case was ultimately settled, so there was no more sort of action on the merits. And so we don't really have, I think, a strong indication of where that judge might come down if he were confronted with this case. But as I say, I focus just on the merits because I don't know what judge we're going to get assigned, and I never know what an individual judge is going to do anyway. But as I say, on the merits, I think the case is pretty strong.
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
For anyone who cares, there are 5 district judges, and then there's a chief district judge and 1 senior district judge. So 1 out of 7 seems to be the direct odds, assuming that they don't look at our case and say that this judge has previously seen it or something like it. Does somebody want to make a motion to authorize this lawsuit?
Mr. Chairman, I would.
Okay. Is there a second?
Tim, I'll second it.
Okay, second from Mr. Hagan. That just puts us procedurally in considering it. Are there other questions or concerns about the lawsuit from members of the Executive Committee?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Redpath, what is the LNC's cash and accounts payable situation currently?
A moment. I actually have that in my email. As of yesterday, we have unrestricted cash of $11,000 and payables of $32,000 and change, which is down from a very significant and large number. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hall, but none of the bills for this lawsuit would come due in the very near future. Is that right?
Well, the filing fee would, and the admissions fees for the 2 attorneys, myself and Mr. Teddards, who I have not actually introduced to the committee yet. But those are $100 each for the admissions fees and then $400 for the filing fee. I think after that, we're good for a pretty long time.
Okay. And so less than $1,000.
Yes.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Redpath?
Yes.
Other questions?
I've got a question.
Go ahead, Sam.
Mr. Hall, what do you think ultimately, win or lose, this lawsuit could cost the Libertarian National Committee in terms of money?
If we win, it will cost nothing. If we lose, I think the most likely outcome is that the plaintiffs would be on the hook for all of their actual costs. So that would be the $400 filing fee and the 2 $100 admissions fees. plus any other incidental costs along the way, like postage and that sort of thing. In this case, since we're going to be having to travel to Maine, I think travel costs would be the main expenditures. And to some extent, that's out of our control. If the judge says that we're going to have a pretrial conference in chambers, we have to attend, and that means a plane ticket and potentially one night in a hotel, although perhaps not. So it's, a little bit difficult to estimate these things with any specificity, but I think that it's reasonable to think that we can litigate this case for $5,000 or less in costs if we win, and if we win, our cost will be reimbursed to us. Now, if we lose, it's there is a risk that we would have to pay the defendant's costs. In many cases, when we litigate ballot access cases, there really aren't significant costs that the defendants incur. In some cases, they are more aggressive than others, and they want to take depositions. In that case, you have to pay a stenographer and effectively pay for the transcript. In some of these cases, I have seen costs assessed against, in fact, the Libertarians for as much as $6,000 or $7,000. That has happened on a couple of occasions in the last couple of years. I have to say I think that's on the unlikely end of the spectrum, and the $5,000 or less is more likely, but it's really impossible to say at this point.
Thank you. I'd like to, so we have a motion on the floor, right?
We do.
I'd like to make a motion to amend the motion to place a $5,000 cap on expenditures on this lawsuit.
Okay. I think that would be in order. Is there a second to the amendment?
I second.
Okay, there's a second from Ms. Harlos. The effect of this would be that the lawsuit would be authorized and we would be able to proceed expending up to $5,000 on a lawsuit without having to come back to either the executive committee or the national committee.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Lark. Do we have any indication to what extent the Libertarian Party of Maine will contribute to the expense of such a lawsuit?
Dr. Lark, sorry, not to interrupt, just to say that I have been in communication with the state party chair, Chris Lyons. He's told me that he is trying to raise funds. I don't know anything more than that.
Thank you.
This is Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Redpath.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm in contact with Chris Lyons yesterday and today. Is he on the call?
I had inquired earlier, and I had not heard anything in the affirmative.
Okay. Well,
Jeff Lyons is on the call, not Mr. Chris Lyons.
All right. Well, anyway,
they're both from the Northeast.
Right. I was under the impression that Chris Lyons was going to be on the call because I was in contact with him earlier today. So anyway.
If I recall correctly from the previous couple rounds that we've gone in Maine, the Maine party has contributed some amount, but it was not the bulk of the cost for the last couple of things that we did, both the voter registration drive and the previous lawsuits.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Lark. Do we have any information? I don't know if Mr. O'Donnell is on the call, but Mr. Jeff Lyons is evidently on the call. Do we have any indication as to whether or not this issue has caused any publicity for the Libertarian Party of Maine? In other words, are the major newspapers in Maine, are they looking at this? Is this something that we could use not only for the purposes, of course, of actually changing, getting a favorable ruling, but also creating a fair amount of interest, perhaps, in legislative changes? Is this something that people in Maine are talking about, at least people who care about politics? Do we have any indication about that?
I will ask Jeff Lyons if he knows anything about that.
Yeah, I don't. Sorry, there's a lot of echo there. Yeah, I haven't talked to Chris probably as recently as most of you have, but I do know that there's a lot in politics that they're talking right now about, the ranked choice voting and things like that. So I think that this would subsequently be sort of another thing that the media would probably pick up on. I definitely would like to be a part of that, help figure out if we can get some media attention out there, definitely.
Hi, this is Chris Lyons. For some reason, my line is just unmuted. I can answer a number of those questions if you can hear me.
Go ahead, Mr. Lyons.
Okay, stepping back. For some reason, my line keeps muting and unmuting, so I apologize for that. We have about $500 we can throw towards the lawsuit at this point in time. That takes us down to zero, but we can do it. We are actively recruiting money. We did run into a huge snafu last week where we were sabotaged by a former officer, which kind of limits our social media outreach to raise funds. However, we believe that will be corrected, hopefully within the next 2 days by basically getting our Facebook page back, which was at a following of over 6,157, something like that. We have been reaching out through people with emails as well. As for, we did generate a lot more registrations and sympathy in the past federal court case, which is our ultimate goal. We have approached Democratic legislators to change the ballot access. Unfortunately, where there was sympathy, I think that's going to change because the Socialist Party of Maine has filed for party status too. That's very cynical of me, but I suspect it's very accurate. But we did find that the federal court case generated tremendous press and favorable press, and that aided us in registration of Libertarians to meet the unfair law. And also the Secretary of State's office and legislators were informed, senior senators, that if we go after them again, if we take you to court again, it's going to cost you money, and we're going to make it public. So that's our position.
Thank you, Mr. Lyons.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Lark. Do we have a decent ballpark estimate if, by chance, we don't pursue legal action or we get an unfavorable ruling? What is a decent ballpark estimate of how much it will cost to get the 5,000 signatures by January 2nd, 2020?
I think it's not signatures. It would be voter registrations.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Right. My apologies. Yes.
I think ballpark we were around $30,000 last time. Does that sound right, Chris?
We actually spent about, as a collective, with the luckily money we were able to raise, and we've not been able to emulate quite embarrassingly, was about $76,000.
76?
And that is, and that's registered. However, I have found very efficient, very professional circulators that are willing to do it at $4 per card. So 5,000 times 4 is 20,000.
All right. So the range, I guess, is low end $20,000 up to the most recent $76,000. There is another option for putting a presidential candidate on the ballot in Maine. As I recall, party status is something we've gone for relatively recently. But I don't. Bill, do you remember what the?
I think it's 4,000 net.
Okay. No, it's 5%, and Gary Johnson did meet that in Maine in the last election. But you still have to then register 10,000 voters, Libertarian.
No. Just to put a presidential candidate on. with signatures.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I believe it is 4,000. Yeah.
So 4,000 net. That's at current rates in New England. That's under 20 grand, like 15 to 20, something like that. Does that sound right, Bill?
I would say, well, we would have to wait until post Austin. So
okay.
Ballpark, it would probably be ballpark 20 grand, I bet.
All right. So does that kind of give you the rough numbers, Jim, as far as
it does indeed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Other discussion? Hearing none, are we prepared to move to a vote on the amendment to cap the expenditure at $5,000? Karen Ann, if you could call the roll on the amendment.
Certainly. Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
Mr. Hagan?
Yes.
I will vote yes. Dr. Lark?
Aye.
Mr. Merced?
I vote aye.
Mr. Redpath?
I'll vote yes.
Would the chair like to vote?
No, thank you.
We have 6 yes, 0 no, 1 abstention.
Okay. The amendment passes. Are we prepared to move to a vote on the underlying motion to authorize the lawsuit? Hearing no further discussion, you could call the roll again.
1 moment, just clearing out my scores here. Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
Mr. Hagan?
Yes.
I will vote yes. Dr. Lark?
Aye.
Mr. Merced?
Aye.
Mr. Redpath?
You betcha.
You betcha. Would the chair like to vote?
No, thank you.
Okay, the vote is 6 yes, 0 no, 1 abstention.
All right, it passes. I don't think there's any further business, although I want to take a moment to remind people that William Hunt is running for State House in Rhode Island's 68th district in a 4-way race with some really good past performance. His website is hopewithhunt.com. So if anybody wants to check that out and support his campaign, there's a pretty good shot we have for a State House win up in Rhode Island. That's my,
I'm sorry,
my
Mr.
sole
Chairman,
announcement.
when is that election?
March 5.
Okay. Hopeforhunt.com.
Hopewithhunt.com.
Hope with Hunt. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Harlos.
While the EC is here, to just let them know, I received a complaint from several members that our conference system, which charges more money for T-Mobile users, and I would like to inquire if there would be an objection that we just use Zoom in the future so that everyone has equal access without additional cost.
I don't think there's any objection or specific thing that stops us from using Zoom. And I do know about the T-Mobile issue. So there is a call-in capability with Zoom, correct?
Yes, and there's no additional cost.
Yeah, I think I would leave that to the discretion of whoever's planning whatever teleconferences we have in the future, whether to use one or the other. But I don't think there's anything that would stop you from using Zoom if the people who would like to participate or, T-Mobile users would prefer it.
Point of information, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Mr. O'Donnell informed me that his phone carrier was unable to connect to this conference call this evening.
That would be the T-Mobile problem. It varies between not being able to connect and charging per minute rates.
Yeah, I have to say this is Oliver, and I'm on T-Mobile, and I'm able to connect, obviously, but I do get charged, I think, a penny a minute.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't want to buck custom unilaterally.
Yeah, I think in the future you can use what is convenient and accessible for people. Just as an FYI for people, we are probably going to be suing Arkansas in the future. That's still shaking out. And
yes,
I think we can take that up at the in-person meeting in March.
Mr. Chairman, I may ask for an EC meeting beforehand. That's possible.
If it's necessary, we will.
Okay.
If we need to do it beforehand, we'll do it beforehand. But
all right.
I anticipate if we don't, it will definitely be on the agenda for the March meeting.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Is there anything else? Go ahead, Dr. Lark.
Mr. Chairman, just a note, I don't know that it will make a big difference to our operations, but I think many of our members, it might be useful to remind them that for the first time that I can recall since I've been on the LNC, we will have an LNC meeting taking place on a day where daylight savings times goes into effect. So we will be springing forward on Sunday, and so people might want to keep that in mind.
I appreciate that, and it's so unfamiliar to me as an Arizonan. Your odd customs.
You might want to just note that, you and perhaps Ms. Harlos might want to note that there will be a time change on the Sunday in which we will have our meeting in Alexandria.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we have to fill up that time with more stuff on the agenda.
I certainly would hope not.
And, Mr. Chairman, it's Bill Redpath. Jim Lark has been curing my ignorance about certain things for about a third of a century now. But I had not been, of course, I live in Northern Virginia, but the LNC meeting is not at the usual hotel, correct?
That is correct. It's at one that is relatively close, but it is not the one that we are normally at. If you give me, let's see, hotel. It is at, if anyone else has this ahead of me, please go ahead. It's at the Hampton Inn and Suites, Alexandria, Old Town Area South at 5821 Richmond Highway. So over on the other side of US 1 from the office.
Okay. So that's on Richmond
Mr.
Highway.
Chair,
Go ahead.
I will include everything in the OneNote notebook so that everyone will not have to keep looking it up. So I will add that to the OneNote notebook tonight with all the phone numbers and directions.
Thank you. Are there any other announcements or things before we adjourn this EC meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I think that the Executive Committee should express its thanks to Mr. Lyons, the chair of the Libertarian Party of Maine, and offer our best wishes to him as he and his colleagues go forward.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Thank you, Mr. Lyons, for making yourself available for this call and for the continued work to try and get the Libertarian Party of Maine stable status in the state. All right. With that, we will be adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful evening, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.